Hi, Mika, and thank you for joining us for a Writer's Life interview here at Commonword. So I think we'll just jump straight in. So could you tell us about your latest book in 1 minute?
Such a challenge, that one, isn't it? So the latest novel that I wrote was a novel called Pale Kings, which is actually the sequel to my debut novel, which was Lost Gods, and that was, I guess you could call it your typical Joseph Campbell style hero's journey story. So it's essentially a coming of age story. It's kind of centered around this cohort or this group of young assassins who are set in sort of Middle Eastern, pseudo East African context and world. It's very conventional in terms of a lot of the very familiar tropes in the fantasy genre. It will be in there, but I wanted to put a bit of a twist on it in terms of having it in a different space, a different context with different characters. And as I say, it's a coming of age story in which the protagonists of the story go out on their first mission, and in so doing begin to discover that the world is not everything that they've been taught to believe that it really is. So a lot of beliefs and a lot of ideas and a lot of convictions that they were trained to believe get overturned on this journey and on this adventure to discover the truth. I don't know if that was a minute at all.
That's okay. I'm not going to be too strict. Yeah, great. Yeah, sounds really interesting. Thank you. So you're based in Manchester, and I know you've been been a Manchester writer and been involved with Commonword throughout your kind of writing career. So yeah, what does Manchester mean to you, and has living in Manchester influenced you creatively, do you think?
Yeah, undoubtedly. It's a weird one to try and talk about what Manchester means to you in some ways, because I think whenever you're born in a place, it's so familiar to you. It's so much a part of the ether of how you think, how you feel, just the world that you live in, that you don't notice it. It's kind of like asking a fish to notice the water. It's just there. And so
Yeah.
I don't think I really appreciated Manchester in any clear or distinct way until I lived away from it for a period of time. So when I was in university, the second year of my degree, I spent out in the United States. I was living in a place called Toledo in Northern Ohio, and having that year out there, and this is kind of like pre-Facebook, so it was being away was very away. That was away from home. And so I think having that year out there and then coming back to Manchester after having a year away at that age as well, that's when I really began to appreciate all of the different details and nuances about the way in which this city is actually put together. And especially for me, kind of going on to the second part of your question, is, the cultural diversity of the city. It's an incredibly culturally and ethnically rich place, and I don't think I really appreciated that or valued it or understood how distinct and important that is until I was away from the city. And so I think having that kind of very diverse experience and growing up in the milieu of this type of environment where you have the opportunity from school ages to acquaint with so many different cultures, from working class, middle class, upper class in my case as well, white people, people from Bangladeshi backgrounds, Indian, Pakistani, Jewish, just such a rich tapestry. For me, it was very, very formative for me in terms of shaping, I guess, shaping who I am as a human being, but in particular shaping my sensibility towards the kind of world I wanted to create and the kind of stories I wanted to tell when writing. And so I think becoming acquainted with Commonword and Commonword very much having that value in emphasizing this kind of diversity and the initiatives that they build and established, for me, it was almost a perfect mix, just in terms of it being a nice microcosm to develop and to understand the voice that I wanted to write and speak with and the stories that I wanted to tell.
Nice. Yeah, happy to hear that. So could you name the key milestones in your writing career? And I mean, these might not be the ones that are like, showcasey. It might just be actually something personally where you felt like a transition as a writer. Yeah,
I think there's two that come to mind. I think the first one would be when probably the very genesis of, for me, writing fiction happened through an email exchange I was having with a friend. This is a long time ago now. And I was working in this job that I absolutely hated. I was working in an office role, which is really not for me. And I was on my lunch break, I think, probably, well, I hope I was on my lunch break. I might have been doing this during working hours, who knows? But I was having this email exchange with a friend and just talking about just having a moan, just
Mm,
talking about my life and the things that I was displeased about. And I was talking about the experience because I was feeling so low at the time. And they would say, you know what, can you describe to me how you feel, but don't describe the emotion of it. I don't think I can quite wrap my head around that. But if what you was feeling was some sort of entity, what would it
mm,
be? And something about that question, it was such a, I mean, it was a weird question to get at the
mm,
time that we started the interaction, but something about them asking that, it just kind of sparked something in me. And so I wrote, I don't know, maybe it might have been a couple of paragraphs down, sort of describing this creature, which represented my emotions at the time. And their first response wasn't to continue the conversation in terms of what we've been discussing. Their first response was to say, wow, Mike, you're an amazing writer.
mm,
And I'd never really, I don't think I'd ever heard that before. Or if I had, I certainly hadn't internalized it before. Like now
mm,
looking back, I can see in retrospect the various different, I can point to experiences which really do speak to the fact that I've always been that way inclined. I've always been a writer. But at the time, that was my first instance of really having that thought trigger in my mind in a meaningful way. And so for
mm,
me, from there, I thought, well, gosh, I want this emotional entity or reality on the page. There was something so cathartic about the experience of putting it out onto the page. I
mm,
wanted that creature to be dismantled or destroyed in this little
mm,
fantasy on the page that I'd made. So I thought, well,
mm,
I'm going to need somebody who's going to do that. So I need a character.
mm,
Oh, well, that character's going to need a backstory to explain why they're there. Well, that backstory is going to need a world and a context in order for that to even make sense. And so that kind of just over a period of months just evolved into what ultimately became the manuscript for my first novel, Lost Gods.
wow.
And with that manuscript, I think there was something I wasn't aiming to write a novel. I was just enjoying the catharsis of actually expressing how I felt emotionally onto the
Mm,
page and having that outlet for my mental health. It was a very personal thing that I was trying to do. And I think probably when I got about 60,000 words in, I thought to myself, oh, hang on, something else is going on here.
mm,
And as I began to show it to other people, people were like, you know, this is actually a really, really interesting story, Micah. And so eventually I took the steps to kind of go through the process of getting an agent and then ultimately getting published. But the actual initial paragraph that I wrote describing that emotional state that I was in at the time is still in the novel. The kernel
mm,
of it is actually still in the novel. So that's always been a very weird, very strange, very peculiar, but ultimately very gratifying part of having the opportunity to ultimately publish a story in the end.
right, yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
and did you tell your friend? Like, I mean, or does
I
your friend
did,
know?
yeah. Well, yeah, they kind of knew. I guess they were kind of checking in during the journey, and I was sort of,
Yeah.
I mean, when you're, I guess, at that stage when when you first start writing, you're very, very reticent and hesitant about showing your work to people. You feel very
Yeah,
vulnerable
yeah.
about it, especially if you're trying to write something that's very personal as well. And so I was very, yeah, I was very hesitant about the process, but eventually I became a little bit more forthcoming and allowed people to see the story. So yeah, that was definitely one of the key ones at the genesis of my journey into writing fiction. And
Mm,
I guess the second one would be, this is not fiction related, but it is writing related. It would be when I had the first opportunity to write for an organization called Media Diversified. And
mhm,
so they were a platform that was set up, I think, probably around about 2012, 2013, something like that, really to provide a space for this writers collective, people from diverse backgrounds with diverse voices, to have an opportunity to write for a publication where at the time there wouldn't necessarily have been that opportunity to do so for the likes of other mainstream media. And so I think having the opportunity to work with those guys and to write articles and essays,
mm,
and to have to work with a sub editor and editor for the first time as well, and to have that type of dialogue where you're discussing ideas and thinking
mm,
through in a really meaningful way, a really rigorous way, the way in which you want to try and communicate ideas on the page. That was a super fun experience for me, really, really creative and fun experience. And I think it's the
mm.
first time where I really began to think of myself as a writer. I
Yeah.
think there's always, I think for many people, not just me, I think everybody has an element of imposter syndrome in whatever it is that they do, at least at the initial stages. And I think it can take a while, especially in writing, to really think of yourself as, oh, I'm a writer.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think for me, having the opportunity to write on that platform,
Mm,
um, and all of the feedback and all of you know, you get some exposure, people get to read your work. I think that's probably the first instance in which I really thought to myself, oh, this is who I am. I'm a writer.
Mhm. Yeah. So beneficial, like I said, for confidence building and like just getting to understand the process of from idea to like execution. And nice. So you're mentioning that, you know, you had this office job, and you know, then you got into, you know, you started with the story, and so that was a bit later, I feel. So you'd maybe done other things before. So what advice would you give to someone who's, you know, maybe like dabbled a little bit, but then never fully commenced their writing journey until they were like that bit older? What advice would you give to that person?
I guess I'm possibly rehashing a little bit on what I've been talking about, but I think really finding a way to gain that sense of ownership over the fact that you are a writer. So being able to admit to yourself the reality of who it is that you are, because I think writers have a very particular sensibility, just the way it's not so much to do with what it is that you do, it's more to do with the way of thinking that you have. There's an inclination to your temperament that you can't avoid. There's a sensitivity or a sensibility about the way in which you experience the world around you, about the way in which you want to capture your memories and your experiences, the way in which you want to try and understand things that are going on around you as well. And I think being able to really recognize what that is and understand, oh, this is who I am, actually, this is what I do, this is what I should be doing, and have a sense of affirmation over that isn't dependent upon anybody. Because in particular, I think for anybody anyway, but I think in particular, if you're a writer coming from a minority background, it might be a little bit more of a point of emphasis on this issue, because I think it can take a while before it's getting better, but it can take a while before you might necessarily see faces, examples that ultimately exemplify what it is that you're hoping to pursue. There's not that many writers out there who coming from the backgrounds that we're talking about. And so I think being able to identify yourself as that and own it is really, really key. And then I think as a second step from that, being able to really, and this is an ongoing journey, but being able to embark on that journey of really coming to understand what your voice is meant to be as a writer. So why do you want to write? You know, if the goal is I want to get published, or if it's an external goal, then I always question whether that's really an authentic reason for writing. I think there has to be something that goes a little bit deeper than that, where you're able to say, there's a story that I need to tell, there's a subject that I need to explore, and that writing is the only mechanism available to me to know how to do that. Even if nobody sees it, this is what I have to do. There should be that sense of compulsion and impetus to write. And so I think once people have that, then just start doing the work. Read as much as you can and write as much as you can from there. But I think in the first instance, you want to be able to identify yourself as a writer, and you want to be able to take ownership of your journey and actually embark on that adventure of pursuing this craft.
Yeah, thank you. I think like brilliant advice for all of us. At any age, that's like, thank you, really good advice. And just to close then, might be a tough one, but can you sum up your experience as a writer in one word?
Kaleidoscopic. I'll go with that. Yeah.
Nice.
It's been a very eclectic and a very colourful experience. So yeah, I'll go with that.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate you giving me the time.